Probably the worst thing that you can do to the betrayed spouse is what we call trickle truth. It's giving details out over time, which is re-traumatizing over and over and over. And the problem is sometimes, as you know, getting someone to be willing to share what they've done. But the thing I tell people is you'll never be loved unconditionally as long as you only conditionally let your mate know who you are. And why in the world would you want to try to control them by the flow of information? Why would you want to rob them of their choice of how they're going to respond?
Hmm.
You need to be trusting God, not them. And I even tell people, this isn't about trying to save your marriage. This is about trying to save your life. In the long run, I even told Stephanie this, Kurt. I just said, look, I can't make saving the marriage my primary goal, because if I do, it's not pragmatically smart for me to tell you everything that's going to make you want to drop kick me through the goalpost of life. Why would I
Yeah.
do that? But if I make my goal to become who God made me to be obedient to God, if I become the man that I'm supposed to be, because I don't ever want to be that other guy again. If I
Yeah.
become that, maybe I'll be somebody you want to be with. But I have to begin to live according to my values. And so I just say, try to get them to the point to where they listen to God. What's God telling them? And maybe that consequence of sin is death, but you're not going to get what you deserve. You're going to end up being somebody you can respect. Because right now
Mhm.
you don't respect you.
All right. So somebody had an affair. Ugh, that's heavy, right? I'm just maybe first speaking to the church leader out there, or maybe a loved one, the spouse, the individual themselves who is not sure how to navigate this. And maybe this episode popped up on your feed and you thought, well, here's something to listen to. Man, I've been that leader who's helping couples navigate infidelity in their marriage. And man, it's tough. There's so much emotion and there's not a quick fix. So I want to bring in somebody like Rick Reynolds, who is really one of the foremost experts in the country when it comes to Christians experiencing an affair and the dynamics there, the person who committed the affair to the betrayal partner, to the affair partner, to the families involved, all those things. And I was connected to Rick Reynolds through a mutual friend, and I'm so glad we had this conversation. I hope you find benefit in it. I hope it's a good starting point. I don't claim that this episode is going to give you the 5-point plan to solve it all, and by the weekend, and you'll be able to move on without any issue. There's so much going on here, so much trauma, so much struggle, so much hearts broken in all of this. So we talk everything from why people have affairs, the different types of affairs, the things going on. What are the components that we first need to focus on? What are the timelines? Like, how long is it going to take? Is there healing really possible? How can we rely on community and others who are further down the path, in their own personal affair journey to find grace, find healing? And I promise you, through the grace of Jesus Christ, there's hope. It happens. And all listening can contribute to success and healing as we orient people back to the covenant path, back to a life dedicated to Jesus Christ and his gospel. And so you're really going to benefit from this. I hope you share it with maybe others who've experienced some of this or are going through it. Maybe this is the first starting point. People may be in the thick of it thinking all hope is lost. This is the worst day ever. And maybe this is the beginning of that ray of hope coming in. So you're going to love it. Let's head down to Austin, Texas and connect with Rick Reynolds. All right. So Rick, you, I don't know. How do you frame yourself when people ask you what you do, what your specialty is?
I'm the guy that nobody wants to be seen at lunch with.
Why is that?
Well, because of what I do.
Yeah.
Actually, I primarily work with couples dealing with infidelity.
Wow. And what's the background? How do you get in that business?
You want the long or the short answer?
Well, you can go a little long. I don't
Okay, we'll
mind.
go a little long.
Yeah.
So in 1984, I ended up cheating on my wife,
Hmm.
and it turned our life completely, as you can imagine, upside down.
Yeah.
I think spiritually, it was probably the biggest shock. Um, it was with my wife's best friend, my best friend's wife, and we were actually at a church retreat when the covenant of marriage, by the way, which is kind of awkward when you're in the middle of an affair. And I actually, as this guy was speaking with my affair partner on this side and my wife on this side, had a vision. And it was just basically a being of light telling me how much, well, he let me see my life over here, but he just kept telling me how much he loved me. And
Mm.
that, yeah, that wasn't good. But suddenly that intense love, just with him fully seeing me, just broke me. And um, then he sticks me back in the conference room and I'm bawling like a baby. And I just remember saying, "What do you want from me?"
Mm.
And it just said, "I want you to be honest." And I went, "That's crazy." Because at that point, Kurt, I was actually suicidal. Um,
Wow.
I mean, because I couldn't see any way out of this. I couldn't be, honesty was not an option, which left suicide as kind of my only choice. And I go to the speaker afterwards. I said, "Hey, I've got a story to tell you," and told him what was happening. And his first question to me was, "What's God telling you?" And I said, "Well, funny you should ask, but he's telling me that I should be honest, but that doesn't make sense to me because why should everybody else be hurt because of what I've done?" And he
Yeah.
said, "Well, if God's telling you that, why does it need to make sense to you?" And I thought, well, that makes sense. And he said, "Really, what does the Bible say the consequence of sin is?" And I said, "Well, death." And he said, "Right. So anything they do short of killing you is going to be mercy. I mean, you're
Mm.
not going to get what you deserve." So I thought, that's a great way to look at it because I'm not going to get what I deserve. All I'm going to get is grace. And from there, as we drove away the day after that, I said, "I've got something to tell you." And I just started sharing the story. And through that process, I would have told you there's no way that we would have survived.
Yeah.
Stephanie Kidd, this was 1984. Steph could find only one book on infidelity. She
Mm.
was filled with shame. But thankfully, we went to this spiritual renewal conference about a month later. And in the one book that Steph had found, there was a story about somebody having an affair. And I was telling her, "Hey, this is me. I mean, see, I'm not the only one. There's
Mm.
somebody else that's been like me." And when the person we're staying with at this retreat or at this seminar, he said, "So I think the main speaker, has had an affair. You might want to talk to him." And I said, "You think he's had an affair, or you know he's had an affair?" And he said, "Well, I just think. I don't know for sure." And I said, "You want me to go up to this guy at a conference of over 1,000 people and say, 'Hey, I hear you cheated on your wife?'" And now, my wife thought this was a great idea. And so I said, "You weren't worried about my ego, right?" And um, she said, I said, "If I see them alone, I'll talk to him. I see him alone." Well, we skip one session, go outside on the Belmont campus in Nashville, and it's like the rapture had occurred. There's not a soul on the campus except for this guy and his wife sitting under a gazebo. And
Wow.
Steph just grabs me and yanks me over there. And I said, "Hey, I hear we might have something in common." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, I cheated on my wife." And he said, "Yep, I did the same thing." And I'm kind of going, "Thank God." Yeah. And he said, "What have you guys been doing?" And I said, "Well, Steph found this one book called Myth of the Greener Grass by a guy named Peterson." And uh, he said, "Yeah, I've read that book." And I said, "Yeah, there's a chapter in that book, and this guy's story is just like mine." And he said, "Yeah, that's me." And I said, "Yeah, that's me." And he said, "No, Rick, that's my story." Peterson
That's
came and
literally him.
interviewed me, literally my
Wow.
story. And I went,
Yeah.
whoa, what are the odds that God could bring somebody from Florida and I would come from Denver and meet the person whose story was written about in a book 5 years previous? And I went, that's amazing. But it was having that couple to walk with us through that process. That made all the difference. It let us
Yeah.
see that it could be done. And
Yeah.
it that journey, it took us on an amazing journey. But years later, I was a marriage and family therapist, by the way, at the time.
Hmm.
And so I wanted a career change because I didn't see being a therapist after that. So I became a home builder at that point instead of a home wrecker. Um, it was a good trade.
Yeah.
And but later, when I came back into therapy, I just heard the Lord say to me, "I want you to work with 50,000 couples annually."
Wow.
And yeah, that's what I said. How do you
That's a
do
lot.
that? That's a lot.
Yeah.
and but I knew what Steph and I had gone through and what God could do. So we began to set up our program at fairrecovery.com. Um, but we did it in a way that I think from the lessons we learned about how important it was to have community and to have safety and to have anonymity. And it's been a really fun journey.
Yeah. Wow. And I appreciate your story there because it's just sort of that first step of de-shaming the situation when
Oh,
you feel
totally.
like you're the only Christian who's ever experienced this and made this mistake. And then suddenly, oh wait, he did too, and he survived. And wow, there's hope there.
Right. And more than that, I think when you experience, I think the love of God too. I mean, I was willing to
Yeah.
go tell anybody at that point, only
Hmm.
because I just couldn't believe how amazing God's love was in spite of what I'd done. And that really helped also with that shame. And then Jamie took away the rest of it. And so once that shame was gone, it was so freeing to be able to just be honest and be real and be seen.
Yeah. So when it comes to infidelity, I mean, that can be an umbrella term to some extent. When
Right.
when we're talking about infidelity, because I've heard of emotional affairs, physical affairs, and everything in between, right? But how do you define just the concept of infidelity?
Infidelity is the keeping of secrets, period.
Hmm.
It is when you're excluding your wife from another piece or your mate from another piece of your life. I mean, there could even be financial infidelity, even though ours is really aimed at relational, but we kind of look
Yeah.
at six types of affairs. There's one night stands where somebody gets stupid drunk and does something. There's somebody who thinks they've fallen in love and found their soulmate. There's sex addicts. There's emotional affairs, non sexual, emotional affairs, sexual, and there's love addiction. And each one of those has its own path, I think, to healing.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking from like a pastoral perspective, as individuals, because sometimes it may be the pastor or the bishop who finds out first of
Oh, yeah,
the
for
of the
sure.
affair, and wow, it's like and I've been that bishop before, and I'm thinking, how do we even begin to approach this? Especially if there's these different kinds of infidelities and affairs. So, I mean, where's a good starting point for a pastor or a bishop?
Well, so having somebody that they can talk to is great. Where, hey, talk to this couple, they've been there, done that. I know in our ministry, we actually have set up free resources. So, for instance, on our website at fairrecovery.com, we have a thing called the First Steps Boot Camp. And a lot of pastors use this. And it allows for 7 days, it gives that couple topics to discuss and it detoxifies it so that they can actually have conversations. And our goal was just to keep couples from blowing up, where they would take a pause and see, ultimately what God could do. But they need a way to be able to talk about it. And the problem with a pastor or a bishop or a therapist, it is really difficult to be seen as equal handed, for instance, or as
Yeah.
balanced in what's happening, especially with couples. And it's much better if you can get other couples involved. But that first day's boot camp to me has been the thing that has probably been used the most. We've had literally tens of thousands of people go through that, and it stops them from hitting the eject button.
Interesting. So, you mentioned like having just being balanced there because I would imagine, if it's the husband who's been unfaithful, the wife wants the pastor or the bishop to punish them to the nth degree and
Absolutely.
be on their side. Of course, you're on my side because he's the one that did this, right? And it's hard to navigate that in a healthy way.
Well, and really, what they're looking for are different things, and
Mhm.
what they need are very different. We just finished a research study that I found to be fascinating, which the betrayed spouse, they're really looking for. They need help with trauma. They need help with um, understanding why, but they also want safety. And ultimately, the wayward spouse is looking for something that's balanced, but they're also trying to be understood, but they want to understand why they did it
Hmm.
at a whole nother level. They want insight. And it's hard because they're kind of looking for different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Speak to me about the concept of disclosure in general, because oftentimes it may be um, what's the term? The person having the affair maybe goes to their bishop and says, "I need to tell somebody, and I know this needs to be fixed. I don't know what to do." And then, oftentimes we think, from my experience, I often thought, well, we just need to rip the band-aid off, right? Let's disclose this, tell it, and move on, right? No matter what damage that may do. But what should we understand about just disclosing an affair to a spouse or to a family or that?
Well, so probably the worst thing that you can do to the betrayed spouse is what we call trickle truth. It's
Hmm.
giving details out over time, which is re-traumatizing over and over and over. Um, and the problem is sometimes, as you know, getting someone to be willing to share what they've done. But the thing I tell people is you'll never be loved unconditionally as long as you only conditionally let your mate know who you are. And
Hmm.
why in the world would you want to try to control them by the flow of information? Why would you want to rob them of their choice of how they're going to respond?
Hmm.
You need to be trusting God, not them. And I even tell people this isn't about trying to save your marriage. This is about trying to save your life.
Hmm.
In the long run, I even told Stephanie this, Kurt. I just said, look, I can't make saving the marriage my primary goal because if I do, it's not pragmatically smart for me to tell you everything that's going to make you want to drop kick me through the goalpost of life. Why would I
Yeah.
do that? But if I make my goal to become who God made me to be obedient to God, if I become the man that I'm supposed to be, because I don't ever want to be that other guy again. If I
Yeah.
become that, maybe I'll be somebody you want to be with. But I have to begin to live according to my values. And so I just say, try to get them to the point to where they listen to God. What's God telling them? And, you know, yeah, maybe that consequence of sin is death, but you're not going to get what you deserve. You're going to end up being somebody you can respect because right now
Hmm.
you don't respect you. It's a
Yeah.
tough place, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, like, I would imagine some individuals, I mean, they want to be forthright. They want to tell the full story, but maybe they're just not ready to. I mean, they just don't have the capacity to do. Do you find that sometimes they just can't do it no matter how much they try, so they rather just stay in hiding?
Well, so in those, I sit there and say, look, we're going to work together and, um, well, we're going to work together and figure out what the issues are. But when
Hmm.
you tell her, we're going to figure out how to tell her or tell him. And we're going to do it all at once. We're going to give you support. But we try to set a system up where that ultimately can happen. So I just work with people toward disclosure. Then I've worked with people probably 3 months or 6 months, helping them kind of get
Yeah.
their own head straight, and then we do disclosure.
Yeah. And during those 3 months or so, the other spouse is aware that there was some infidelity, but maybe not to
Not
what extent.
necessarily.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've actually had people. Well, they've stopped the infidelity, of course,
Yeah.
but um, it's almost like I let the Holy Spirit work on them
Yeah.
and get them ready so that when they're doing it, it's not unburdening themselves. It's out of compassion and it's out of love and it's out of concern. It's out of support for the other person. Um, it's for their benefit because I think you have to grieve over what your sin is costing another person
Hmm.
rather than just, the reason people don't share so often is because they're afraid of what it's going to cost them. It's not
Hmm.
that they're focused and figured out what it's going to cost the other person. And when you can make that mind shift, suddenly I think you can take a different type of responsibility.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the natural thing, like for maybe an inexperienced third party, like a bishop or someone who doesn't see this every day or see clients about or is in that world so much, that we, that infidelity is disclosed to us as the church leader, and we naturally feel like we have got to tell the other spouse as soon as possible, because we need to start that process no matter how hard it is. But so what I'm learning is that with the right therapy and therapists involved and the right people involved, that to say, let's just take the steps to get to that place where everybody's on board to reveal all the truth, rather than um, being kind of swimming in the shame of it, right?
Right. And more than that, disclosure so often, one of the things I treat is a lot of CPTSD. I mean, honestly, when I get people, the majority of the time, Kurt, sadly, they've already done the trickle truth. They've already found out.
Yeah.
They've already gone through 6 therapists before they get to us. That's the average number.
Yeah.
And so, what happens for the betrayed spouse if they don't get the information in the right way? If because they're going to be demanding details. When they get those details, however, what that does is allows them to create videos in their head of what that must have looked like. Those videos are the things then that are traumatizing and ultimately create the whole CPTSD aspect, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where
Hmm.
they're just living and continually reliving it. So, can I explain a little bit about CPTSD
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what it
I'm
does?
intrigued.
Yeah, so this is where the real problem is, because you may have seen couples as a bishop that have been stuck, and it's like they can be a year or 2 years, and they're not moving on, and it's because of the trauma. When somebody gets traumas, whether it's a vet or whether it's betrayal trauma, when that memory comes back, they literally jump time zones and they're reliving, they're re-experiencing what happened 2 years ago. They're not living like in 2025, they're now living in 2023. And so to them, it was yesterday, not 2 years later.
And you're
So
talking about like the betrayed
the
spouse,
betrayed
or
spouse, right?
okay, yeah,
If you do disclosure to where there's too much detail, I mean, they get to know the detail. I tell people answer their questions, but always try to warn also, let's be careful what you ask, because ultimately my goal is also to try to keep them from being traumatized by the experience, because it makes recovery a lot more difficult if if they're like a vet out of a war zone who's continued reliving those events. Even if it's imagined what they created in their head, they're still reliving it and they can't move on.
hmm so they may experience maybe 2 or 3 days that were really good, and they think, I feel like I'm kind of getting grounded here and moving, and then it's sort of that reset of that
Just one trigger,
traumatizing,
back
yeah,
one
a
trigger,
trigger
and they're
will,
all the way back. And it's
wow,
like they go back through the cycle again. Um,
yeah,
and it could be, in fact, I just worked with somebody that was 6 years past D Day, and she was still, every time she saw a place, every time she saw the garage, every time she heard a name, she would immediately go back to 2019.
yeah,
And he's going, are we ever going to get over this and quit talking about this? But she couldn't stop it because she kept getting triggered.
yeah,
And the thing is, you can heal from that. I mean, for that lady, it took me 3 hours of working with her, and all of those memories were gone. So
hmm,
it's possible to get healing even from that, but it's not going to be time that heals all wounds. It's how you spend the time.
yeah. And oftentimes as a church leader, we kind of get hyper focused on the behavior. Like, has the inappropriate relationship stopped? Like, okay, good. Well, that's the important thing. And or we hyper focus on, the person carrying out the affair, because they did this. It's all on them, and we kind of
Right.
forget about the betrayed spouse and the trauma that's happening there. And so it's a broad. I mean, this is a familial event, not just an individual's bad decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. Churches don't understand. Well, even a lot of therapists don't understand. in this latest thing we did, only 32% of therapists were found to be very helpful, which means, 68% were not helpful. And it's the same thing with church leaders. And so we think they ought to be able to get over it. If you would just forgive them,
Yeah.
then
Right.
what the problem is you're not forgiving them. You need to forgive
Mm,
them. No, the problem isn't whether they forgive them. The problem is the trauma, and they can't quit thinking about it.
yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
physiological problem, not psychological or spiritual.
Yeah. And what does typical treatment for that look like? I mean, you talk about just in a few hours there. I mean, what is it you're doing to address trauma? Is that's maybe a whole nother episode, but
It is another episode. I mean, for me, I think people, so I look at this probably very different than others, but some of the latest neuroscience research deals with what's called, I don't mean to geek out too much, but trauma memories are stored in the posterior cingulate cortex rather than the hippocampus. That's where our normal memories are.
hmm,
And so with a trauma memory, it doesn't ever fade into the past because it's in the PCC, not the hippocampus. So what all I do is use a technique to convert that memory to a hippocampal memory. And so if they write down, you know, 8 memories that are plaguing them, then we just convert those 8 memories and they're fine.
yeah. Yeah. It's kind of just sort of working and massaging the mind to move them in the right place to where they can be processed, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the sad thing is a lot of times people will even blame the betrayed spouse, saying, well, you haven't grieved, or you haven't let go, or you haven't accepted. And the people don't understand it's really, um, it's a problem with the way things were stored. It's in the brain, it's not in the
Yeah.
mind, and they can't think their way out of it. So hopefully the field is going to grow and people will learn it's as simple as converting a memory from one part of the brain to another.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. I'm curious with with disclosure, obviously it sets an emotional bomb off in that relationship. And the betrayed spouse, obviously, rightfully so, is just swimming in this betrayal and this emotion of it. And so, they're jumping to conclusions like, well, I'm filing for divorce tomorrow and
Hmm.
you'll never see your kids again. And this is,
Right.
I'm moving out. And as a church leader, as a third party, we're sort of looking at like, whoa, 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 wait, no, let's,
Hang on.
let's not move so fast. Right. And so it's hard to, we try and sort of navigate the boat in this storm of emotions. What perspective comes to mind? I mean, as we're in that sea of emotion of the situation.
Well, I always start with what the guy asked me when I was going through it, Kurt. I just say, so what's God telling you?
Hmm.
Um, and they kind of stop and they go, I don't care.
Yeah.
Or I'm saying, well, that might be important. Um, I think that many people don't think there's hope.
Hmm.
But if you think about it, um, in Genesis chapter 2, it talks about how a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one.
Hmm.
And I believe what's happening when I look at a couple, I look at 3 entities. There's him, there's her, and there's us. And there's a shared soul in a relationship. That's the oneness. And it's so important. And so when that attachment rupture happens to the betrayed spouse, it's like it's an explosion internally. It's not something that happened to them. It
Hmm.
shatters their sense of identity. It shatters that bond that God created between us. And it's probably the most painful thing they'll ever experience. I mean, it's a pain like no other. It shatters their trust, their self confidence. It makes them feel ashamed. Um, and even though because they didn't do anything, but they still feel it's got to be them. And this is the problem with betrayal trauma versus PTSD. If I'm out in the woods chasing a bear, or I get chased by a bear, excuse me, I wish I
Hmm.
was chasing the bear. That's a single incident trauma, and I am not worried about what happens to that bear. I just want to survive. And the next time I
Yeah.
go to the woods, there's a really good chance I'm going to experience fear. That's
Yeah.
the net consequence of PTSD. For developmental trauma, a child, CPTSD, when a parent is abusive to a child, the parent can't take the chance of shooting that bear and killing it. He needs that parent for a lifeline to survive. So, what the child does is they turn it into shame, and it must be their fault. They take responsibility for what the parent's doing. In a marriage, when that rupture occurs, there's a really good chance the betrayed spouse will blame themselves and take on shame. They'll go, "What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me?" And so now they're feeling shame. And they even feel shame because they've been dishonored and they haven't gotten rid of the person who dishonored them. It feels dishonorable to even be with the person who dishonored them.
Yeah.
So they have to be able to see other people, I think, who have worked through this, who can speak to what's possible. Because it's not just about the trauma. They need to see a vision that this isn't about getting better or healing. This is using this as a catalyst for transformation. The best marriages I know have gone through this. They have literally taken that pain and God's used it to grow them up, and they experience miracles. And you've probably met couples like this. They go
Yep.
through it and they're like, they're super strong. And you're going, how
Yeah.
did that happen? But that's the advantage of being able, if you have two parties, it takes two to do this, who are both committed to addressing their issues. I mean, it's the best chance they'll ever have to have the relationship they always wanted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they got to hold on. My answer is hold on. See if they'll hold on and just see what God can do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I love that question you say, like in that the thick of the emotion, asking like, well, what does God want you to do? Like just even encouraging them, orienting them towards
Right.
God, right?
This
Even if
way.
they refuse to, to listen in that moment. But, and what I've seen, just my personal experience with working with people, is the emotion does sort of calm down sooner than later. And then people are a little more grounded to take some responsible steps without long before they've made any, decisions, that are long term. Right. And you can get them there and just be patient for that. Right.
Right. But as you know, also, if you're getting a betrayed spouse to do that, you certainly want the one who strayed to be broken and to
Yeah.
be not, who they want repentance, they want change, they want
Mhm.
transformation. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you don't want to get somebody to stay with someone who's going to just continue
Yeah.
to not honor commitment, who's not going to live out of integrity or character.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you said about, getting other couples involved who are further down the journey than they are, right?
Right.
And because oftentimes it is a temptation for the church leader to say, well, you know what? Yeah, this is terrible what's happened. Let's handle it behind closed doors. You stop having the affair. You should forgive. And let's see if we can over time piece this marriage back together again and move on. When in reality, that can that it's just a very superficial response to a very in-depth problem.
Yeah. And inadequate, totally.
Yeah.
Because that's not going to lead them to healing. One of the things we discovered when we started thinking, how do we get to 50,000? What people need is safety. And because of the shame, they even need anonymity. They
Hmm.
need to know that they're not going to be necessarily put out there. Uh, so, in the courses we've created at Affair Recovery, we don't even use video. We've put cohorts together from all over the world. And we will put 5 couples together with a group leader who takes them through a 13-week program. And then that group continues to work together for another year. Because or they do a weekend, same thing. But what we found is when you're with other couples going through the same thing, there's no shame. I mean, everybody's part of the same tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and you can understand far more your situation as you see it in another couple than as you just are kind of sitting there in your own, pain and your own shame. And that's the fastest way for them to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful. And so I'm just thinking as a church leader, knowing like, okay, I need to involve other couples here. It's not necessarily up to that church leader to find other couples who are, but to find a good therapy office, or like your program where it networks these individuals together so that they
Right.
can find those people, right?
And networks them in a very safe way and has kind of a proven process that works. Because
Yeah.
again, if using therapists, unless you're really confident, remember 68% of them won't be helpful anyway. I mean, that's horrible. I'm not trying to diss my own field, but one of the things that if a therapist, for a therapist to be helpful, um, one of the things we've seen is they have to be willing to confront the situation. Marriage therapists, what they want to do is focus on what's wrong with the marriage. Well, that doesn't help the affair. You
Hmm.
first have to heal that betrayal bond. This
Yeah.
person has to be able to have empathy, to begin to understand what it was like to live on the other side of them and the damage they've done. And this person has to believe they care, that they matter to this person. And without making that happen, so if a therapist starts focusing on the marriage, the betrayed spouse is going to feel blamed.
Yeah.
Um, and they have to encourage a lot of talk about it. They got to keep discussing it over time. That's one of the biggest predictors of whether or not a couple will stay together. But what a therapist or bishops or church, what they'll do is they'll say things like, well, okay, we've covered this. Okay, we need to put this behind us now. And that's one of the biggest predictors for divorce.
Interesting. And so as those things come up, as the church leader feels like, man, why isn't he or she getting past this, or we're not making progress? I need to tell them we need to get past it. When in reality, that's an indicator of actually there might be lack of necessary treatment going on here.
Right,
Maybe they are in therapy, but maybe this isn't working if they keep hitting this wall, right?
right. It's almost like the betrayed spouse needs to touch that hurt 1,000 times until it doesn't hurt anymore to touch it. It's like and they have to heal from the trauma, but and there's a timeline that couples go through where you can go, man, we should be past it. But most people don't recognize the timeline. But if I share the timeline, that so usually things are as bad as they're going to get for about the first 3 months. Um, if a person doesn't have PTSD, um, the intensity of those triggers and those reminders from the shock of what happened will begin to decline. There's still no trust. Things are usually getting better about 8 or 9 months, but at a year, almost every couple will go off rails. They will blow up, and they'll think they haven't made any progress because all of the reminders that happen on that 1 year anniversary. And so we always tell couples, okay, I'm glad you're doing better. It's going to get really bad in 3 months when you hit your 1 year anniversary. So just hang on. And of course, they never remember that. And we remind them. And then at about 15 months, they're beginning to really experience a much deeper level of relationship. Now, this is taking both of them are doing their work and trying to not be the other person they were in the marriage, but become who God wanted them to be. By 24 months, they can pretty much deal with the anniversary. Um, you know, 3 years, you may notice it, but it's not a big deal. By 5 years, you laugh about it. I know my wife at 30 years, somebody was telling her about somebody having an affair because we work with thousands of couples. And she said, man, I just can't imagine what that would feel like. And she said, well, of course you can imagine. She said, oh, yeah, I can remember. Yeah, I can. I mean, you don't even think about it. Uh, it's a piece of your story, but it's not all of your story. Most people see it as the thing that actually refined them, not that defined them, as long as you look at it the right way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So, and I appreciate that timeline. Just sort of like, this isn't this slight progression upward. It's up and down a little bit, and here comes your 1 year mark. Everybody buckle in. Here we go. We
Hmm.
can get through this, and that's helpful. That's really
Well,
good.
yeah, it's realistic expectations because otherwise, even the wayward spouse may be going, why can't you get over this?
Yeah,
And I'm going, dude, you're at 6 months. I told you it would take 18 to 24 months.
yeah,
So why are you
yeah,
getting
yeah,
impatient?
yeah, yeah. That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Um, what thoughts come to mind as far as, you mentioned your history and your affair, like obviously with friends. I'm just thinking of, when an affair comes to the surface and it's, two individuals who go to church together, or in the same congregation, or they're neighbors, or I don't know, like, I mean, naturally we want to think, well, you two can just never talk again, or one of you have to move, or one of you have to go to a different church, or like, how do you, what's the advice as far as navigating the affair partners and that dynamic?
Well, probably the best thing a bishop can do is sharpen his pencil and fall on it, because that's going to be bad. I mean, or what if there's a child involved? Um,
Oh yeah.
so if the church thing in our situation, it was really weird. I was actually teaching a class at our church on marriage, and I was leading a small group at our house. And obviously, our prayer partners were at the same church, and the best solution for us, I think, was to go elsewhere. It was going to be too painful for Stephanie to still be in that um, same, congregation with the other person. We eventually moved to Austin. They moved to Nashville, but it's really difficult if you have to be in the same place, unless, um, well, it's a hard one. It's just hard if you have to work together. If somebody's still
Yeah.
working with your prayer partner, that's difficult. And you have to come up with a plan, ultimately, of how the betrayed spouse can feel safe in that situation if there's no way to leave a job.
Mm.
Um, if there's a child involved, we always say the marriage comes first. That's difficult, but if you're going to be involved with that child's life, everything has to go through the betrayed spouse if they're willing. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, you get in some really sticky situations,
Yeah.
and unless the person has healed, there's too much chance that that type of exposure makes healing even more difficult for the couple. It might be okay in a year or two, but it's really difficult, close to ground zero when things really blew up.
Yeah. So it's really like a case by case type of thing. I mean, ideally, the more space and separation that can be created there, that's ideal. But if not, especially if a child comes out of the affair, you just have to navigate those things the best you can, while also reaching for healing in the relationship. Right.
Yeah, the child thing is probably one of the most difficult, um, and I've seen it handled multiple ways. But it's not impossible. Those couples still heal and they do great.
Yeah.
It's just complicated.
Yeah. What comes to mind as far as general guidance on just the children of the marriage who experience their own trauma, their own, by when the affair came to the surface?
Ooh, um, Not everybody agrees on this one, but I can tell you my opinion.
Okay,
Uh,
sure.
Kids, I kind of look at three types of normal. There's pretending normal, which isn't good. I mean, because you need to be authentic.
Yeah.
There's protecting normal, which to me, you try as best you can to protect kids from your problems and not include them in them. And then there's practicing normal, um, where you work at being together, see if you can be normal. But with kids, if there's, I prefer to tell kids, if a couple's healing well, tell them
Mhm.
in retrospect, where it's like when we told my kids we were going to be in Good Morning America. So our
Oh
kids
wow.
didn't know yet,
Uh-huh.
right? So we thought, okay, time to tell the kids. And we'd always intended to tell them, because what we wanted them to know is their legacy, and that, we were living proof there is nothing God can't heal, and that it's a piece of who they are. I wanted them to know there's nothing they could ever do their mom couldn't forgive,
Mm.
and how amazing she is. So to me, the story was really important, um, to just glorify God. Now, If they had been older when the affair was happening, I think we might have said, we're having problems. Um, but it's our marriage is our business, and you're not involved in it, and we'll take care of the marriage.
Mhm.
If people feel like the kids know, we try to come clean on it and say, we're dealing with this, but again, we're not going to talk to you about it. We've got other people helping us, but because I think the danger is sometimes a parent will want to draw a kid in as for an alliance, and that's just not healthy for the child. His
Mm.
spouse
Yeah.
advises a child, um, and it delays their healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. I kind of feel like I'm jumping around, but these are all really intriguing topics. As far as you mentioned early on, like oftentimes people go to, whether it's the marriage partners or the pastor bishop, they go to a place where primarily we're here to save the marriage, when in reality that's sort of secondary to actually we're working on ourselves in this. So the betrayed partner's working on themselves, the person who did the betraying is working on themselves, and because that needs to take place first before we can even reunite this marriage in a healthy way. Is that safe to
Or
say?
I think in our program, what we do is if we can get um, couples, when we take them through like our emergency marital seminar. So we have kind of four courses. One of them is a weekend, a 3-day intensive. And that's like 6 months of therapy. They're in small
Mhm.
groups, but they're therapist led. But what we do is we put like a cast around the couple to keep them safe. And then we encourage them to decide not to decide for a year and then work the program. Working the program means then do the individual work
Hmm.
to get healthy. So we kind of let the marriage continue to function in a safe way with that group where they're held in the container of community. That's not shaming, it's their learning, but then they're doing the individual work to never become that other person again. And what do they need to grow spiritually? So
Yeah.
one of the mistakes I see is people will say, well, we can't work on the marriage until you get fixed. Well, that allows a marriage to kind of drift over time, and it lowers the probability of them being able to work things out. So it is important, I think, if you can make it safe for them to still stay in the relationship and to learn. And it's really helpful for the betrayed spouse oftentimes if there are mates there to answer questions, to give support, to give assurance, to show them that they're concerned and they really care, and that they do matter to them. And that begins to heal that attachment wound that occurred from the rupture.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just appreciate the decide not to decide, because I think that can, it's so easy to for the marriage dynamic to come up early and be like, well, what are we going to do? Where is he going to live? Where am I going to live? Like, where, and it's sort of being like, well, we're not worrying about the marriage right now. We will get to that. We will get it, all the attention that needs. But for right now, it's almost like running up to someone who was just in a car accident saying, well, what kind of car are you going to buy next? You know what? Can you afford that? Do you think you'll qualify for the loan? Or it's like, wait a minute, like, let's make sure everybody's okay. Let's realize what happened. Let's get through the
Yeah,
trauma of it, and we'll decide that later. We can figure that out. Right.
we
But
can.
it's,
And again, it's so funny when I get couples in a group, Kurt. Um, well, again, this is neuroscience, but what's fascinating the way God made us, we're made to be in community. We were,
yeah.
God designed us to be in community. And um, an interesting thing about some research, social baseline theory, when a person's in that group, um, they don't have any trouble emotionally regulating. They don't get dysregulated
Hmm.
because the group is carrying the emotions. The dorsal lateral
Oh,
prefrontal
wow.
cortex, the part of our brain that helps us emotionally regulate with fMRIs, is not even online when they're in a community. But when they're home alone, then that part of the brain is firing. So the community is the thing that helps establish like the carbon rod in that nuclear reactor, and provides that safety, and it gives them support. For us, we realized we need to support 24/7. We didn't need a therapist once a week. we needed people we could reach out to that were on that journey with us, that could throw that rope down the well to pull us up um, at 3 o'clock in the morning if we needed. So community is really helpful if you have people going through the same thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting way you frame it. Like because I felt the strength of community, just my own life, right? We all do, and it's sort of like I don't know why it works or why it helps, but I know I need that, so I'm going to do that. But to frame it that's because the entire community is helping carry my sorrows and my burdens and my struggles, and that brings a lot of strength that way.
Right. And more than that, moral character is developed through community. Um, a lot of people, if I ask them, when did you do best spiritually in your life? You know what they'll say? When I was in college.
Mm,
The reason they do well in college is because they're part of a very close community. They're breaking bread together. They're doing things
wow.
together. They're sharing life together. And in that community, there's a lot of moral and character development. But as we go through life and we become more isolated, you know, we literally become more self-centered and we can stray easier. But when we're in that group, it literally calls us back to a higher standard. And that's really, I think, for the wayward spouse, one of the reasons community is important is it helps them reset with other men. It keeps them honest. It keeps them growing.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I love that. This may sound like a question I should have started with, but I want to go to this place like, why do people have affairs? And I want to frame it in this way: of
Okay.
oftentimes as church leaders, we kind of will witness maybe couples who experience an affair, and just I mean all the things we've talked about already, right? Just the emotion of it, the up and down, the trauma, and so we'll stand in front of our congregation and want to do our best to encourage this not to happen again. So we'll throw out sort of platitudes like, well, never be alone with somebody of the opposite sex, and whatever. And I think we've all experienced, not that I'm actively trying to be alone with somebody that's not my wife of the opposite sex, but from time to time it happens. And it's not like I'm like, white knuckling it, avoiding the affair. And so I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, what else is going on under the surface that's going to be a stronger indicator rather than just making sure we're not alone with the opposite sex? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of it is what is modeled for us in childhood,
Mm,
honestly. Developmental trauma, to me, is a huge contributor. I mean, in my opinion, not every traumatized child is an addict, but every addict is a traumatized child.
yeah.
And in that sense, if you come into a relationship with having developed survival strategies of like living a dual life, um, learning to emotionally regulate using sex or alcohol or something like that, yeah, that certainly increases the possibility. Um, so if a parent cheats, it actually increases your probabilities of being unfaithful. How early you are, how young you are when
Mm,
you have your first sexual experience is a big predictor. Um, and mostly, who are the people you're hanging around with? If you're in a community that it's okay, it's almost like bad company corrupts good morals. I kind of look at it. It's a three-legged stool. Um, bad marriages don't cause affairs. I know that. Um,
mm.
they may take as much as a third of the responsibility, but that's it. Because if bad marriages caused affairs, then both people would be having affairs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the second third to me is really about developmental trauma and what they grew up with and
Mm,
strategies they grew up with. And the third problem is spirits of the air. It's there really is a devil, and there
yeah.
really are places that I think, and media supports
Mm,
it, and so many things push it. So it's not just about not being alone with someone of the opposite sex. That's a good idea, by the way.
sure.
But the other thing, you know what it is? It's pride.
Mm,
People are only as weak as their strongest link. Um,
mm,
People will put themselves in situations they think they can handle. And it's that hubris and allowing yourself to be in situations that are high risk that ultimately take people over the edge.
Yeah.
But if they didn't have that pride and thought, well, I'm not going to put myself in that situation, I'm going to take that risk, then, you're not going to get into trouble.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I would imagine, I mean, there's probably indicators along the way, or correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm probably those who have experienced an affair probably had a higher use of like pornography and those types of acting out mechanisms, and which kind of led to this type of thing. Is that?
Well, that's category number three, um,
Uh huh. Yeah.
addictions, surely. But like what's called a limerent relationship, when somebody becomes infatuated with another person, we could say that's an addiction to a person, maybe, but that's kind of different. It's like
Yeah.
it wasn't porn leading up to it. If somebody gets drunk and has an affair,
Yeah.
um, that's not necessarily pornography that led up to that. It's stupidity. An emotional affair. It's like people may give themselves permission to do things. And so that's a problem. Um, it's just a lot of damage that's happened, to people. So I think
Hmm.
that um, predictors are hard. They really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I guess we should all just be anxiously engaged in a life committed to Christ, and, doing our own work, and, really in that wrestle spiritually to be in,
Yes.
in relationship with God, so that, because it's not going to be like, oh, there's that indicator, something's happening, or, that's just the messiness of mortality, right?
Right. I mean, all have fallen short, of the glory of God, so to
Yeah.
speak. It's just, it's understanding. It's not assuming monogamy. I think people think because we're married, nothing will happen.
Yeah.
It's assuming that the devil is like a roaring lion, and you need to always be on guard.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious. I don't know if you follow like the data this close, but I mean, is are affairs more common today than in the last 10, 20, 30 years ago?
So the data that I see is yes. I think the internet. It was much harder to have an affair in the day when Mrs. McGillicuddy was
Hmm.
staring out the window, and there wasn't internet, and there wasn't um, that sort of thing. With the darkness, so to speak, it's much easier for people to follow and to think, even in chat. Um, nobody's not hurting anybody. It's just chat. It's a chat room. It's a this.
Hmm.
And um, they have, so it's the ease of access and opportunity, I think, has made things go up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, even to starting with secret text messages to then actually meeting up and those types of things. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
easier to navigate that than in the
I mean,
1980s, right?
well, even iPhones now have it so you can hide apps.
Yeah,
I thought about writing an article about that. It's going, holy smoke, why are you letting people hide apps so
yeah.
you can't see the apps that people may be using for affairs?
Yeah, it's wild. Is there anything going back to you talk about those three parts of maybe some general reasons why affairs happen? Is there any significant differences in women having affairs as opposed to men having affairs?
Oh, somewhat. This is a big generalization, so I want to be very careful
Okay.
here. It's not true across the line. But typically with women, what my experience is, so, or maybe another way of explaining it, guys, their genitals are on the outside. So, and women's genitals are on the inside, and that pretty much explains the difference. For a
Mm,
guy, they can be sexual, but their heart doesn't necessarily have to be connected. For a woman, typically, it's more likely to be emotional. And
mm,
for a woman, it's more shameful, to be honest. And people need to understand that. So, if you've got a guy who hasn't been attached, again, the marriage didn't cause it, but again, how she grew up,
mhm.
um, a woman has to be pretty much really disconnected in her heart from her marriage before she'll go over here, or she has to have a lot of resentments. And because it's shameful, they'll really even be more negative about the marriage to justify what they've done. Now, that is a huge overgeneralization. It's not true across the board, but
Yeah.
I see women really have disconnected and aren't as interested. They're more ambivalent about coming back to the marriage than a guy who's caught cheating. Guys, like,
Hmm.
oh, I screwed up. I want to come back. A woman's more like, well, I don't know because, they really hurt me and I'm not sure I'm interested in being with him.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Um, is there like, as far as like divorce, I mean, obviously, affairs lead to divorce. I mean, it happens, right? Is there, you talk about that timeline, you get through a year, you get through 24 months and, hopefully progress is happening, but sometimes is there just maybe one partner that just can't reconcile it? And so divorce is sort of like, this is just what the next step needs to be. So we can sort of reset with a different partner.
That is an attitude. It's almost like the other person has to see their mate becoming somebody different. Again, not being that other person. I mean, Stephanie, for instance, Kurt, she says she likes her second husband. She's not very fond of the first one she was married to, right? And
Uh-huh.
I'm both of them. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want to be her first husband either. And I
Right.
think her watching me transform, you know, made me appealing to her and also a good choice.
Yeah.
Um, but if I hadn't done the work, in fact, because of that shame, in one of our surveys, we were able to show that the one thing the wayward spouse could do that made their mate feel honorable again instead of shameful is working a really strong recovery program. When they saw their mate working really hard at not being that other guy, um, they felt good about themselves. But if the guy just said, or the girl just said, "Well, I just won't do it again," that didn't help at all. It was like,
Yeah.
why would I? Words are cheap, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating. Any other question I should be asking that I'm not? I mean, when you think of church leaders and things they experienced sort of as a third party in all this, or
Well, I think getting educated about understanding trauma, understanding what's normal, because I think the um, intensity of reactions of these couples, it's uncomfortable. Um, and you almost want to control it. One of the things that we've done at affairrecovery.com, we have a library with like over 5,000 resources. We have a YouTube channel with over 1,000 videos. And what we do is people, if they have a question, they can go there and find answers to, okay, so is this normal? Is this not normal? Um, and the education piece to me is, and I even tell the wayward spouse, get educated about trauma because that's what you're going to be dealing with. And you may think they're just crazy and there's something wrong with them. But in reality, it's not them, it's their trauma brain. And, um, and you got to speak hope. And the fact that God can work any miracle, but I think getting them with the right type of help, again, where they can just anonymously go like to the website and take the boot camp. Um, or we even have a thing that I developed called the Affair Analyzer that's free. So it's a library. But in the Affair Analyzer, it literally has over 850 different outcomes. It's a decision tree. And what it does is it says, you're this type of person, you're married to this type of person, here are going to be the struggles that you have as a result of who you are. Here's the type of affair you have. And we can feed people specific information. And getting the right information that can say, here's what you can do is really helpful because nobody knows what to do. And it's like if they can at least, like Jamie and Jackie, the couple that helped us, having someone to say, hey, try this. Um, this will be helpful. This is what worked for us. Again, you need that hope. You don't want to be like this island floating out there. Get them connected and get them protected.
yeah, that's really helpful. Really helpful. Well, Rick, this has been really educational, fantastic. I've got one more question for you, but before I do that, what if people want to learn more about you? You talk about affairrecovery.com, right? Is that a good
Right.
starting point, or any other place that you would point people?
I think that affairrecovery.com is what I've spent the last 20 years developing just because. finding a vehicle that is just designed to help people to go through this in a safe way. That's what we do. So I think that'd be the place I would recommend.
Awesome. Love it. Well, we'll definitely link to that. Last question I have for you is mainly I want to go back to your story. Just maybe articulate to us like your journey through this. You talk about the changes you went through, the new person you are. What role did Jesus play in all of that?
He played, you know, what I found, um, and what I find when people are really broken and they let go of trying to manage and control things is you become really open. It's like you don't think you know the answer. You don't think you understand there is a God and it's not you. And what I found, Kurt, is the Word of God just became alive. Everything I read, still to this day, um, that is the thing that sustains me. You know, I can tell you verses Genesis 1, 2, and 3, Psalm 51, Psalm 37, Romans 5, 6, and 7, John 14, 15, 16, 17, Ephesians, Philippians 2 and 3. I mean, it's on and on. James, the whole book of James, Sermon on the Mount. I
Yeah.
memorized that. I mean, it was like scripture just became what I memorized every day. And because he was just talking to me through that. And I was memorizing not verses. I mean, I'd memorized the Sermon on the Mount. I memorized the book of James. When I have somebody come in, I have them memorize Psalm 51 about David's affair with Bathsheba. And because when you begin to write it on your heart, it's really different than just reading it. It becomes a part of who you are. So that to me was my favorite go-to.